I can't imagine at what point anybody thought that was okay, like on so many levels. You know, it's all part of this same dialogue around the way that we choose to exert power over and treat children because they're children. And that's awful, awful business.
Hello, and welcome to No Running in the Corridors, the rebel podcast that aims to rewrite the school rulebook, one regulation at a time. My name is Helen Mulley, and joining me in the secret meeting room this week, ready to cast their expert eyes over another long-standing convention within our education system and decide whether, in fact, it's actually been standing for just a little bit too long now, I am very happy to be able to introduce two eminently well-qualified and, of course, charming guests. Anthony Benedict has worked in education for nearly 3 decades. He's the CEO of Ambition Community Trust, a multi-academy trust established just a couple of years ago, which has been designed around the principles of relational inclusion. He is also the author or co-author of several books, including his latest, Seeing Children Differently, 52 Weeks of Curiosity, Empathy and Relational Inclusion. Welcome to the podcast, Anthony.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Great. Hannah Carter has so many strings to her bow, it's hard to know where to start. Not only is she an experienced head teacher, she's also a qualified executive coach, author of the best-selling Honest Educator series of books, and a trustee. Her ethos is rooted in inclusion, compassion, and the understanding that every child, regardless of background or circumstance, deserves a quality education and a pathway to success. Hannah, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
You are very welcome. Now, I'm already getting the feeling that we're going to have lots of common ground to explore when it comes to today's rule, thinking about your biographies. But as always, before I reveal the regulation, I'd like us to try a little icebreaker. So I'm going to ask each of you the same question, and it's this. Can you think of an incident from your childhood that shows you as a rule breaker or a rule follower? And I am going to start with Anthony.
So I think I'm a rule breaker, but a bit of a secret one, or maybe not so secret. When we were kids and we used to play in the street, the balls invariably used to get stuck in gutters and things like that. And after a bit, my dad wouldn't get his ladders out anymore. And I'm pretty good at climbing things, so I could always climb drain pipes. But they said, you've not to climb the drain pipe because it's dangerous and all sorts of things could go wrong. But I didn't take any notice of that, and it became a bit of a show. So at this one occasion, there must have been about 20 kids from the street standing in my drive as I scaled up to the roof on my drain pipe, put my hand in the gutter, and it was one of those old lead pipe kind of drain pipes. And as I put my hand in the gutter, the drain pipe leaned off the wall like that. So I thought, I've got 2 choices now. I can stay holding on and then I'll probably pull the whole drain pipe off the wall, or I can let go. So I let go. So I let go and I landed and I didn't break anything, but I did have to run into the house and explain to my dad what I'd done. At which point I then went and climbed up a tree and hid for a few hours till he calmed down.
Excellent. Hannah, can you top that?
I don't think I can, in terms of like Jeopardy and A Sweet Vision of the Past where people played out in the street. I didn't realise how old Anthony was. That was lovely. No, I don't think I've got anything where I've sort of harmed myself in any way. But I certainly would consider myself in my younger years very much a rule breaker. And most of mine, interestingly, was around appearance. I had a very keen sense of justice as a teenager and a very keen eye for fairness and things being applied fairly. And my uniform infringements at school were quite prolific, involving green hair, I used to have some very fetching tights with spider webs on that I was very committed to. Had a period of being a big Nirvana fan. And at one point I actually went as far as sort of Kiss-esque makeup. And so, yeah, my mum was on the receiving end of a fair amount of phone calls. I was on the receiving end of a significant amount of detentions. And yeah, I think that probably has shaped some of my attitudes to school leadership that I live most days. So
that is extremely interesting. And I think it's time to bring that rule out, put it on the table, and let's see what happens. So, the rule we're looking at today is this: no extreme hairstyles. Now, I don't want to preempt anything, but I've got a feeling this conversation could go to some very interesting places, because unlike many of the rules we have explored on previous episodes of this podcast, this one doesn't immediately sound as though it's about children's safety or learning or even behaviour, really. It's about hair, which is a bit odd when you think about it, isn't it? Because hair isn't dangerous. It's not contagious. It doesn't stop you understanding algebra. And yet, schools have been arguing with pupils and their parents about hairstyles for decades, as you just demonstrated, Hannah. Not that I'm suggesting it was several decades ago when this was happening for you. It's an absolute staple of the September news cycle, with those pictures of sad-faced, buzz-cut sporting youngsters on the cover of local papers, and the occasional live version on the breakfast TV shows too. So I am curious, and Hannah, I am going to come to you first on this. Why is it, do you think, that schools have hairstyle policies in the first place? What are they for?
I think it probably, for me, it sits amongst a set of other rules that are established in schools over a period of time and are probably linked to compliance and authority rather than anything that you could extrapolate to learning. I'd say they're around uniformity, around probably a Victorian system that's preparing children to work in factories rather than for the modern world. I mean, Anthony doesn't even have any hair, so I'm not 100% sure he's the most qualified other guest to have, but I'm going to assume at some point he did. But unless that's a choice you're making, Anthony, as part of your trust's guidelines on staff hair.
Everybody has to have a shaved head in my trust. Yeah, everybody.
Right. Yeah. Makes a lot of sense. I hear you.
I was going to ask you, Anthony, is there a hairstyle policy for Ambition Community Trust schools?
So we're a brand new trust. We've been about 18 months, so I don't dictate my school's policies about uniform and hair. One of the things we said is that the schools will retain their autonomy, but I'm not aware of any hairstyle policies. I'd have to go and have a look at that, but I think, I mean, I've moved so much in my thinking from, I'm probably a good guest for this because maybe unlike you, Hannah, when I started my headship, I was very much like, we will control your hair and we will control, and maybe I can give a bit of insight into my journey's been dead interesting because I've totally flipped my thinking.
Okay.
But I think I kind of came through this look smart, think smart ideology that there was something about if you put yourself into the right mindset, then that helped you learn. That was obviously long before I knew about trauma and attachment and neuroscience, but it was that kind of, you need to be in a certain mindset, otherwise you can't engage with your learning. So I have been that head teacher that banned pink hair and there were people in newspapers and all sorts of that kind of stuff. But I also agree with Hannah, this is very much a Victorian kind of hangover of how we used to control people. But it was also a world where there was a place of work and places of work had a uniform as well. So society was very different then. And we're just not like that now. And I also, if Hannah hadn't mentioned my lack of hair, I was going to, because I can remember when we were at school, you weren't allowed to shave your head. But it was often a bald-headed man that was telling you couldn't do that. And the irony was never lost on me there.
Yeah.
Especially in teenage years, we know that young people really value self-expression and their identity is just forming, and it's the time that they're experimenting with how they show up to the world, how they present, who they are. I'm sure we all look back at photographs of ourselves in those kind of formative years and laugh at our hairstyles and laugh at some of the things that we wore. But at the time, that felt really important. It's really important to them. And I just think it's so unimportant in terms of, as you said at the start, Helen, having any impact really on anything. And so it feels like an unnecessary fight and an unnecessary conflict. And for me as a head, my ethos, my approach to leadership, and, it varies across the trust, and we're very similar. There's no top-down approach in our trust. It's about individual schools and individual heads, which I think is exactly the right way to be and super important. And that's how Kemnal is. But my approach is to remove any unnecessary points of friction or conflict, because it's not the thing they're there for, and it's not the thing that matters.
Yeah, I think you've absolutely put your finger on something really important there, because all of these stories that turn up in the news, which just seem so incomprehensible to someone who's outside the education system, they're not really about a child breaking a school rule. They're about the fact that a school has put a rule in place that they are now obliged to uphold. And some rules are so much harder to uphold than others. And if people don't understand the reason for the rule, then you don't get buy-in. So I think quite often if a school has a really rigid, quite arbitrary hairstyle policy, then they're painting themselves into a corner, aren't they? The point that you just raised, Hannah, about how important it is to teenagers, that is actually the place I wanted to take this conversation to next. From the school's perspective, it's just hair. And I reckon a lot of schools still are in that, look smart, think smart state of mind. I think it's an assumption that a lot of people in education take for granted. But as Fleabag so famously pointed out, hair is everything. We wish it wasn't, so we could actually think about something else occasionally, but it is. And there's no denying it, hair feels very personal. So when a school starts dictating what a child can or can't do with their own hair, what are we saying about the power dynamic here, Hannah?
I think, what are we also saying about who decides what smart is?
Of course.
So there's a whole cultural aspect there. There's a whole, from my perspective, white middle-class female, what I might consider smart. It's all so subjective. And as Anthony said, the workplace doesn't operate like that anymore. Bankers wear trainers. Things have moved on. There isn't, the type of cultural norms around what is smart and professional anymore. I'm not sure why schools are still clinging on to it. I mean, it's probably, like I said, one of many things that schools are still clinging on to because they aren't potentially brave enough to let go a bit.
Anthony?
So I'm going to come in at a personal level in that it's very different. So my wife is dual heritage and her dad is from Jamaica. So my children are dual heritage and my daughter's got loose afro hair, if that's, I don't know if that's a PC way of describing it. I feel like it's my daughter, I'm allowed to describe it. So she hasn't got long hair and has always wanted long hair. Now, there's two things with hair, because we talked about hair. One is, with that kind of hair, and we're talking about culture, people often feel the need to touch it. Now if somebody randomly came up to you and touched your hair, you wouldn't like it. But she comes home endlessly saying other children are touching her hair. So that's one point. And then the second one is, so I said she's got sort of, however long it grows, it's always short because of the curls. Yeah. But recently she's had it braided, or I think it's cornrows, I think they are. Again, I probably should know these things. And she is delighted because it comes down to a bottom now and she can do the Timotei flick, and her hair does all these things. But we had an incident at school and she's only 10. So the other thing is, we were talking about teenagers, but I think it goes beyond that. Your hair is your identity from a very young age. She proudly announces herself as a tweenager, but she isn't. She was in school and she came home with her hair in a plait that we hadn't put in. And her teacher had plaited her hair. Now maybe this is a boy-girl. I was like, my wife was furious and she was like, nobody's got any right to touch anybody's hair. And then we unpicked what had happened. My wife went to speak to the teacher, and I know the school really well, and they're not a bad school for things like this. I just think it's poignant. So what had happened was her class had done something and they'd all been in trouble. And so they were kept back and they were being spoken to. And she said she was sitting with her head down, but because she's now got this long hair, her hair was covering her face. And the teacher telling them off, I won't say which teacher because I don't think that's fair. The teacher talking to them had pointed to her and said, "Stop hiding behind your hair." And that was an issue. And then following that, another teacher then tied her hair up. And, we looked at the school that afternoon. There are lots of white children with hair in their eyes. And yes, you see where I'm going.
Yeah, and this is an audio format podcast, but if the listeners could see my face and Hannah's face, we are literally open-mouthed with disbelief that's outrageous, isn't it, Hannah?
I mean, that's more than outrageous. I mean, props to your wife for keeping it that relaxed and going and having a nice conversation. If somebody touched my child, I think it would be a different conversation. I mean, there are so many things I'm concerned about. Punishing a whole class would probably be the beginning. But it gets worse. I mean, every time I thought something worse couldn't happen, you added another layer to the story. That is wild. I can't imagine at what point anybody thought that was okay, like on so many levels. And it's all part of the same dialogue, isn't it, around kids being allowed to use the toilet and kids, it's all part of this same dialogue around the way that we choose to exert power over and treat children because they're children. That's awful business.
Okay, I'm going to play devil's advocate a bit here and try and push back a little from the school's perspective, in that with all of these rules that we end up discussing, what we're talking about is an establishment with a large number of individuals to look after, but also to deliver an education to according to the particular parameters that have been set out. And you literally can't do that if everyone is running around doing exactly what they please, whenever they please. At a very basic level, you have to have everyone in the right classroom at the right time in front of the right teacher. And in order to maintain that kind of order, schools have rules. It's where do you draw the line? And yes, you have parents outraged that their child has been put in isolation for a week until their hair grows back to an apparently acceptable length. But at the same time, it's not like these rules were sprung on these parents by surprise. They're set out in the prospectus, they're publicly available on the website. If the parent still chooses the school, perhaps because they like the outcomes, perhaps because they come top of the league tables, then surely you just have to accept all of its rules, even the ones you disagree with. Hannah?
I wouldn't necessarily agree. So parents don't have the freedom to pick schools. They don't. Like, it's based on geography, it's based on catchment area. Some schools are selective for a variety of reasons. Parents can't have free rein to pick everything about a school that's perfect for them. I wouldn't say I don't know of many schools that would advertise that. In terms of when you think about the process of selecting a school, open evening, open morning, I'm sure head teachers don't say this is the isolation room. This child is here because they're bald. I don't think that's probably part of the tour, along with like the canteen and the art room. So I wouldn't suggest parents are as read in as they could be on that. And yes, of course, I guess if you wanted to play devil's advocate, it's the same as holiday fines. Parents understand that they're expected to not take their kids out term time, but they choose to and the school fines them, etc., etc. But those things are linked to missing learning. Like, a child not being in school during term time is of detriment to the child's education. Yeah. And I think, schools absolutely have to have rules, but if those rules don't centre and foreground the things that are the most important to them, the things that really, really matter. We have lines. I'm ahead. We have things that we don't tolerate. We have things that we absolutely have sanctions attached to. But those things are the things that really matter to us as a school and our culture and our values, around racism, around sexual harassment, around things that society also doesn't tolerate. But when a school is seeking to enforce things that society doesn't enforce, it becomes strange.
Yes, it's about the impact, isn't it? If you want to, as a school, if you're explaining to parents why their child has been sanctioned, and if you can say, well, the reason is because this behavioural choice they made put another learner in danger, or it meant that they missed out on a whole afternoon's worth of learning, anything like that, then a parent can generally get on board. But if you've got parents saying, my kid has 100% attendance, they do all their work, they don't cause trouble, they wear the uniform. Why does it matter if their hair is pink or green or slightly a too unnatural shade of brown, which I know one school, which I won't name, they literally had a colour chart of acceptable hair colours because it was fine for children to dye their hair as long as it was a quote unquote natural colour. And oh my goodness, the red was such an issue, Hannah.
Yeah, so I, again, won't name it, not my school, not my trust, have seen a school that has, like when you went to the hairdressers in the 90s and it had little fake hair in loops and you picked out like, oh, I want to be honey highlights on top of chestnut. They had one of those, a L'Oreal one that it must have come from a 90s hairdresser. And so kids could dye their hair blonde. That was totally fine as long as it was a L'Oreal blonde rather than a Schwarzkopf blonde, which wasn't on the chart. Yeah. It was wild.
And also, going back to what Anthony was just saying, some kids could dye their hair blonde because for some kids, that would be a quote unquote natural colour. And that brings us on to what I wanted us to talk about next. There are some children for whom this isn't simply a matter of preference, because what we're talking about here is an appearance policy, not a uniform policy, not a smartness policy, but an appearance policy. And our appearance is bound up with all kinds of things from culture and, yes, preferences, but also genetics and identity. So let's have a think about the kind of kids who are likely to fall on the wrong side of a no extreme hairstyles rule. As mentioned already, Anthony, children of mixed race heritage or Black children or children with other cultural identities. There might be religious aspects to this. But also there's a huge area around gender expression, neurodivergence and sensory needs, which surely schools should be taking into account when they put these policies in place. What do you think, Anthony?
Can I take us back a bit? I think we've got to think, what do we have rules for in the first place?
Yeah.
Because we're not in prisons and the children haven't done anything wrong and everybody's entitled to an education. That's the point, isn't it? That's what's brilliant about schools. And I feel like, and my head's cringe when I say this, I don't think schools are very nice places anymore. And children don't want to go to school. And actually a lot of the staff don't want to go to school. And so I think you've got to unpick. So when I do some of my training, I say to people, just put your hand up if you're a murderer. And obviously, well, once somebody did, but that's a different story. Most of the time, nobody puts their hand up. Then I say, put your hand up if you're only not a murderer because it's illegal. And then we get a few hands that go up. And what I'm trying to demonstrate is, do we enforce our rules to scare children so they'll sit down, shut up and be quiet? Or do we want to create a society where everybody can thrive and everybody can survive and everybody's got a voice and everybody can be heard? Because I think the children are the future and we've got to make these places a safe and nice place. So our rule system, and I just think schools haven't ever gone back and thought, why are we doing what we're doing? Are we doing this to make schools a beautiful, lovely place? And do we need to adjust things to do that? Or are we trying to control children?
Hannah, what did you want to come in with?
I wanted to say Anthony's not visited my school. It's a lovely place. That is a massive thing. And Anthony interestingly talked about the adults as well. So we recently have had a genuine thing at my school around adult stress. Obviously, it's got really hot. Everyone knows it's hot. Don't need to tell anyone. And staff were anxious about wearing short sleeve shirts. As in like a shirt.
Yeah.
Because they were like, well, I've got tattoos. And I was like, I've only been in my school a year. I was like, all right, so have I. And they were like, well, I can't show my tattoos. And I was like, okay, why? And they were like, because we're not allowed. And I was like, what do you mean you're not allowed? Where's this coming from? And they were genuinely under the impression that they had to also conceal any part of themselves that communicated who they were in any way, like a sense that in order to be a good teacher, you have to be a robot, you have to be this inaccessible version of humanity that has no preferences, interests, likes, personality. And that absolutely is the opposite of what teachers need to be for children. You know, I'm not suggesting we all need to show them our holiday snaps, but we are people. We spend hours and hours a day with them in a building. And I think that probably needs a bit of consideration as well. I mean, it's very relaxed now at ours, and, you know, nobody's in anything that's worrying. But people are dressing, you know, we've got a chinos and polo shirt situation going on, which is nice, you know, and people in sort of more comfortable attire.
Yeah.
Teaching's a physical job. Yeah. Like, it's a job where I want my teachers moving around and being active and doing duties and whizzing up the stairs. You know, I don't want them buttoned up in a suit and looking like they're working NatWest in the 1950s. Like, Anthony's right. People don't really consider these things. And I think because I have never been interested in these things, it's much easier for me. And I am often like, what? Why? Because I haven't ever, but I guess for teachers that have been part of a system or a journey or schools where that is a thing, it perhaps is harder for our older colleagues, Anthony, that might have had a different training experience. You know, I am super young. I'd like to keep pointing that out.
Any comment on that from your bath chair, Anthony?
I just put my teeth in. No, I mean, what I was going to say was, so for the last, since I took on a PRU 5 years ago, if people don't know what that is, it's a pupil referral unit for all the children that other schools think they can't control. But I stopped wearing a tie then, and I was just going to bring it to ties because I thought, we're talking about hairstyle, we've got this ridiculous system where children wear ties.
It's
why?
Mad.
You know, I mean, it was mad enough that boys did, but I suppose you did wear a suit and a tie. But and girls are entitled to wear ties, but I don't understand why we're making children wear ties. We're talking about hair, but you know.
Yeah, it's all part of the same picture, isn't it, Hannah?
Yeah, obviously the first thing I did at my school was remove ties within 2 weeks, because I don't know why we're strangling children with a tiny piece of material. Like, it has genuinely no function. I've not seen a tie outside a funeral christening environment in a very long time. Why would you restrict a child and deliberately make them uncomfortable? Like, it makes zero sense. And I think it's really easy, isn't it, for children to feel a distance from you if you aren't listening and making sense. And I think, you know, it made it much easier for us to address other things by me going, of course, why, you know, absolutely, ties are gone. They're ridiculous. I hear you.
Yeah.
And it means you can major on the stuff that actually matters to the culture.
Anthony?
So, you know, joking aside, you were asking about age and things like that. And what we've done is in our trust, and I know you alluded to at the start, that we've moved everybody towards what we call relational inclusion. So we don't have behaviour policies. We don't do all of those things. And it's a journey. But the reason I'm talking now about this is one of my heads, do you know, I didn't even say how old he is. What I know is he's been a head teacher as long as I've been a teacher. And he's grown up in the area that he's now, and he went to the school, I think, that now he's now head teacher of. So he's been a head teacher for 30 years. And if he was here now, he would say he was a hang 'em and flog 'em type of head teacher up until 2 or 3 years ago, you know. And we talked to him and we've shown him what we're doing. He's my biggest convert, if that's the right. He's actually just messaged me now, strangely. He's my biggest convert, because I think, you know, he must be about 67, maybe a little bit older. And if he can change the way he thinks and the way he runs his school, and if he's a strong enough character to say, do you know what, for a lot of my career, I believed in something that I now don't believe in, and I'm prepared to hold my hands up, learn a different way and do it. If he can do that, anybody on the planet can do that, you know.
Absolutely. And that's the kind of modelling that we should be doing, isn't it? Isn't that the kind of critical thinking and willingness to reassess our position that we're trying to instill in these children that we're bringing through the system? I have one other area I would like us to talk about a bit. And again, it's something that has already come up, but I think we can dig into it a little bit deeper, because I think there is one reason that schools give for a hairstyle policy that is still being brought out and presented as a kind of a gotcha, aha, to make the policy make sense. And I think we could probably interrogate that a bit. So the reason a lot of schools will give to have a hairstyle policy is we are preparing them for the world of work. And I would like to know how this holds up, because does that mean we are preparing children for the world of work as it is now, or as it might be in the future, or actually as it was quite some time ago? Who wants to leap in first? Hannah?
So we have a new-ish, so a year new CEO at our trust, Russell Hobby, and he joined Kemnal a year ago when I joined, just after I joined, and we have a Kemnal 7 strategy. And Russell uses a phrase that I think is really powerful, and it's something that we've started using to relook at as a lens all of these things, which is that we aren't preparing children for a workplace. We're preparing children for lives of agency and contribution.
Oh,
And
love that.
those, yeah, isn't it great? He's very charming. He's a real wordsmith. No, and for me, that's so incredibly powerful. We talk about how is what we are doing around next steps, destinations, work experience. How are we preparing them for lives of agency and contribution? Because that's all we can be certain of. We cannot envisage the workplace they are going to enter or the job market. We can't predict the future. They will work in roles, in functions that we probably don't know exist yet. And so if they are capable of that agency and capable of making a wider societal contribution, then they will be successful. And so, I don't think hair is probably part of a life of agency and contribution. I mean, Anthony appears to have agency and contribute quite significantly as a bald man. So
I'm trying to think of a profession, any profession, where there is any kind of spoken or unspoken hairstyle policy.
KFC.
Well, that's a hygiene issue, presumably. You have to just tie it up or put it under a hat or something. But apart from, the armed forces and maybe the police, I can't think, you can have a banker with blue hair, right? You can have an insurance broker with a buzz cut. You can have a teacher with no hair. All of these things are fine. And I don't think they would raise an eyebrow. I am trying to imagine a politician with an unconventional hairstyle and how that would go down. But even that, I don't think would be a problem. What do you think, Hannah?
I think that's probably, the example of the politician is probably more broad than the hairstyle. I think I don't think that those are individuals that once they became a politician decided on conventional hair. I suspect it might be linked to a certain type of person that probably has always had relatively vanilla style of hair.
Yes, because Hannah, whose surname escapes me, who won the Gorton and Denton by-election, caused quite the kerfuffle by wearing clothes which were a smidgen off the mainstream, let alone anything more unconventional than that.
I wouldn't normally defend politicians, but we had Angela Rayner in yesterday, and she doesn't represent what that sort of traditional politician would come across like. She has tattoos, she's got long flowing red hair that she's very proud of, and she talks like she's from the north. So there are some people that are doing it slightly differently, I suppose.
Yeah. And so essentially what we're saying is that a hairstyle policy has nothing to do with preparing children for a world of work. And if schools are bringing that out as the reason why it's there, then they need to have a bit of a rethink. Anthony?
So, yeah, it also made me think of COVID a little bit. I think COVID changed a lot of these things. Where I'm going from that is, the Teams meetings where people had a T-shirt on and a towel because, the way that we work. And I think the fact that people are working from home, and I think that just blew those last little bits of that archaic. It's still that Victorian way of behaving, but I just don't think that exists anymore. And so I don't think that would stand up as an argument anymore. I think that's somebody blustering and flustering because they don't quite know why they've got a policy that they're being made to enforce.
The rule is there because it's there.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Hannah?
I always have a little laugh to myself when their uniform references gang hairstyles. No gang hairstyles. And I have struggled quite significantly to find a gang hairstyle.
For yourself?
Yeah. As part of my summer look. I don't know what that means. Like, do they mean like a gang from like 2002 version of FBI on the telly? Because I've not ever hung out with young people who have a hairstyle that affiliates them with a gang. I genuinely don't. I think that's probably about 20 years old.
I think some hairstyles do become notorious, and I think some of the establishment become scared of them because of what they think they represent. Do you remember the Meet Me at McDonald's haircut that so many schools got upset about? Sort of big, floppy fringe and shaved at the back.
I think they called that beans on toast up north or something.
Like a llama. Like the llama one.
Yeah,
like
very,
curly, floppy hair. Yeah.
I love the look.
And and back in the day, a Mohican said something, about who someone was. A skinhead obviously said something about the tribe that they were affiliating to. Your emos, your goths. I'm not well up enough to know what the tribes are these days in school. But my impression is that things are quite a lot more individual than that.
Yeah, I've not ever had a concern about a child in county lines and popped on the form anything relating to their hair.
That wasn't what raised the trigger, should there have been one?
No.
Oh, Anthony, Hannah, I knew this was going to be a good debate, and I'm not sure we've even got started yet, but I need to warn you that I can see Larissa from 9C lurking outside the door, which I suspect means she's booked this room to run through her lines for the drama department's performance of The Crucible next week. So we should probably get ready to leave her to it for our benefit as much as hers. Before we do, though, I do need to get both of you to commit to a verdict. And again, I'm not going to preempt, but I'm coming to this with a very open mind. So this episode's rule is no extreme hairstyles. Do we keep it? Do we scrap it? Or do we give it a darn good rethink? Anthony.
Oh, we got to scrap it. Unless everybody's going to shave their heads, and that's the new rule, we've got to scrap it.
And Hannah.
I always wanted to be on Room 101. Gone.
That's going. I'm going to pull the lever. That rule is out the door. And I think that's a first for no running in the corridors. We've had some scrapping it. We've had a lot of rethings, but I can't remember having another episode where both guests have been so wholeheartedly in favour of scrapping it from the start, which is very exciting. Hannah, Anthony, thank you so much for bringing your expertise and your compassion to this discussion. I think it's been a really refreshing take on something that has been, as you said, Hannah, a point of conflict and an unnecessary one between schools, children and parents for what feels like forever. And I hope that we've given our listeners a lot to think about. And talking of our listeners, thank you too for being here. I will be back in a couple of weeks with another rule to test and 2 more guests to test it with. So keep your eyes open for that. And in the meantime, keep questioning, keep learning, and remember, no running in the corridors.